My name is Hyperion Çaca. I currently run with one other the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust Project. It was established by a network of farmers of color in the Northeast region for the purposes of building solidarity, sharing skills, addressing an age-old problem, an age-old economic problem that comes from the lack of access to land. And the desire and the need and the skill set and the ability to do well by the land. And the problem with that ability being unappreciated. So, in the beginning of the year, that's when I was hired, January 1st, 2019 is when I assumed the position. We were approached by a great number of persons asking us, myself and Stephanie Morningstar asking us, how are you going to take on this project? And I want to be a little bit transparent about what the project is. This network of farmers of color, got together a few times, maybe 3 or 4 times. Some of you might be in the audience, might know how many times, but I can count 4 times in my mind. And came up with a wish list. What do we want? How can we get it? What would it look like? That wish list, they then codified into work tasks. And they put those work tasks on a document, and they said we need someone or someones who can be able to do this in about a 2-year period. It is a wish list. It is a really practical list. It's something that no one should have to wish for. And we're going to try to do it within 2 years. Part of what I'm here to share with you is how we're going to do that and what it's going to take from this community, the mycological community. 5 solutions for land-based wealth redistribution. There are currently 5 ways that we know have worked to redistribute land-based wealth. One of those ways is repatriation. Show of hands, how many people are familiar with repatriation? Okay, great. I'm not really going to talk about that in this conversation. There are plenty of people. This is a really knowledgeable community. A lot of this you can talk about amongst yourselves. How about cultural respect easements? How many people are familiar with cultural respect easements? Okay, that's something I can talk about. There seems to be a few others here. I encourage and implore that those of you who are familiar with cultural respect easements, that you share the wealth of knowledge. How many people are familiar with land trusts? Cool, I'm not going to talk about that much, except for as it relates to the work that I'm doing. How many people are familiar with non-human personhood? Great. I am going to talk about that, because that needs to be talked about a lot more. Okay? The mycology community is a really rich community. Really, really powerful community in this time, in this day and age, because there's a community, in some respects, that is obsessed with death. I'm sorry, that was very serious to me. But yes, it is funny. It is humorous, because we live in a time and a place where people run away from their mortality. It is their running away from their mortality and their... it is running away from mortality that has been sustained and sustains a lack of connection with the world around us. And it is mycology that offers a really, really beautiful bridge to mortality and the rest of the world. The reason why this particular conversation is being presented to this community is for that reason. The obsession with death, the link between death, life, and the circularity of our world, and the need to recognize that land-based wealth redistribution is a process by which we put things back into circulation. We allow for things to flow. They are not held up. If they are held up, we are unwell. Who here is familiar with Paul Stamets? Does anyone know Paul's net worth?
Too much.
Anyone want to guess?
Too damn high.
Too damn high. 19 million currently. That's what's recognized. 19 million. Of course, these are estimations. That's how it works, right? Who knows how Paul gained his wealth? Yes?
I don't know like very specifically. I'm not prepared to answer that. I just raised my hand.
Oh, you just raised your hand? No, that's great. Okay, yeah, no. You were so ready. I felt it. Yeah, it's okay. It's great. Paul, yes, patents. Paul is a really talented entrepreneur, a really talented mushroom grower, and a really talented document writer. This man has written and received patents, applications for patents, and he has received them. I believe he has 12 that I know of that are currently being discussed within different spaces that I'm engaged in. They are related to medicinal uses of mushrooms, am I saying, which is important. And I don't know that he's necessarily cashed in on these patents. I know that he's been in the work for a long time, but his net worth is 19 million. Earlier I mentioned this to a friend, and my friend said, that sounds like he's got 18 million more than he needs. I'm inclined to agree. The reason why I bring up Paul is because he is an example for the mycological community. He has led and informed and inspires a culture that is obsessed with death, a culture that is obsessed with death that can truly contribute to the health of the world. And he has wealth. He has a lot of money. It is land-based. I want to talk about how this is land-based. I think some of you probably understand, but it's important to do this because we're being recorded. Oftentimes, people discuss land-based wealth as if it only refers to wealth that comes from ownership of land. But that's not true. Land-based wealth is any amount of wealth that has been derived from a relationship with land. When we're referring to land, certainly we're talking about minerals and soils and the other creatures and presences on that land. It is about the exploitation of that relationship that results in what it is that we recognize to be wealth. Redistribution, pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to explain it because we're being recorded. Redistribution of land-based wealth means that those who have acquired a great deal of money, assets, resources, from their relationship and an exploitation of that relationship with land, redistribute that wealth, those resources, those assets, in a manner that sustains the opportunity, the possibility, and the actuality of global health, planetary health. That is what this work is about. 5 solutions for land-based wealth redistribution. It's not that hard. Like I said, we have land trusts. People have loads of land. Lots of that land is held collectively. It's held in community. Some of what is going on with the contemporary conversation around land trusts, and this is where I mentioned the work that I'm doing with Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust. Some of what is going on is land trusts throughout the nation are currently trying to figure out what is their responsibility in a time of social justice advocacy, and a time of a resurgence of acknowledgement and recognition of those who are indigenous and those who were stolen from the land. In a time of climate crisis, what is the responsibility? What do we do? Northeast Farmers of Color is conceptualized by myself and Stephanie Morningstar, my co-director, as a way by which we can try to secure resources, wealth, assets for a community that has the skill set, the aptitude, the desire to treat the land well, not to exploit those relationships. We believe that Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust Project is an opportunity for us to try to secure a space for a very oppressed people, a very oppressed community, to come to in a time of climate crisis. Some place that can be treated as a home, some place that can be treated as a friend in a time of climate crisis. Our conversations with our land trust friends and community are very different. One of the ways in which we think that we can accomplish this is not just by having land put into our land trust. One of the ways that we think that we can accomplish this is by facilitating the writing and the establishment, there we go, the establishment of cultural respect easements. Cultural respect easements they actually physically exist in two ways. They are both a document that says that a said owner has determined that a portion of their land is now exclusively to be used for this purpose. Cultural respect means that this land is used for the purpose of providing an opportunity for various members of a given community to utilize that land in ways that are traditional to them, in an effort to respect those cultures, to make sure that people have access to land, people who do not exploit land, who need to practice that culture. In order to convince folks to give up a portion of their land, not even give up, but really present a portion of their land for the purpose of cultural respect, you have to have many, many conversations. Those land conversations take about 2-3 years, sometimes 6 years. Folks, there are plenty of folks who are willing. There are plenty of folks who are interested. Plenty of folks who think it should be done. They've inherited this knowledge. They currently operate and exist within the social justice environment. They know that land-based wealth redistribution is appropriate. But it is not a culture that they come from. They do not grow up in a culture where land-based redistribution was an important practice, an important engagement. Those who are young in this time, they will grow up in that culture, particularly if those of you who are present and engaged and did not grow up in that culture, make sure they do. The mycology community, like I said, a culture obsessed with death. I'm going to keep repeating that because it's really important to me. Has so much opportunity in this space to ensure that those who are growing up understand the value of this work. And I'm going to express that in two ways. One, you can hold those who gain wealth through their land-based relationships accountable. That is something that a friend and I recognize. Paul is the mycology community's boy. That's your homie. Make sure your homie does well with the wealth. There are others out here who are acquiring wealth. Make sure they do well. You know who you are. You know what you're about. Make sure you do well. And make sure you do well. Make sure you do well. Do well. That's also a bumper sticker. So one, accountability, community accountability. That's an important aspect of this. The only way in which wealth gets redistributed is because of communities holding persons who have wealth accountable. That is one of the ways in which you're doing it. The second way, and this for me is where I step into this conversation not simply as one of the co-directors of Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, and a person here and present, but as a person whose primary work has been focused on addressing climate crisis through looking into ways in which we can secure child migrants and climate migration. The biggest task here, I think, is, or for the mycological community, is to recognize that land-based wealth redistribution are these 5 solutions that I've presented to you and I will continue to talk about are actually also appropriately recognized as 5 ways to contribute to an approach for climate crisis, to make things better for folks during climate crisis. Here's a question for all of you. What do you think happens when shit hits the fan and people who have been historically oppressed and not cared for do not have resources to buy their way into a situation in which their family members, their loved ones can be taken care of, will be safe? Anyone want to venture into that territory? Yes?
They'll die.
Some likely will. Some will likely die. And some will take it. Absolutely. Some will take it. I also think, yes.
I have a friend who suffered through the big hurricanes 2 years ago, and on a social level, 2 different things happened. There were people shooting each other over bottles of water, and there were these mutual aid networks that sprung up spontaneously. Like the 2 extremes the 2 moral extremes of social relationships blossom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And these 2 relationships we see phenomena like that happening all over the world right now. We can recognize that Syria, the migrant crisis around Syria is directly tied to famine. We can recognize it's directly tied to like changes in the climate. We also know that we don't have to get into that right now. That's not what this is about. There's a lot going on with the climate. There's a lot going on how it affects people. The idea that I'm presenting here is that the mycological community has an opportunity, I think, to address this. Yes.
I want to give a beautiful example. Also happening in Syria, there's a lot of people on the Facebook page that I use for mushroom information who are doing amazing grow ops, because mushrooms are something you can grow on like old, like things that are around in a destroyed, war-torn environment and can produce high nutrient dense food quickly for people. So there's been this surge of I saw 300 people joining this group and being like, how do I do this in my town? And so there's a lot of citizen people, translation going on, and just, yeah, so.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, mycology and the mycological community has so much to do when it comes to climate crisis. And I mentioned this, I said this is important for me, not just because of the work that I do and such, but because when I encounter mycologists, when I encounter a community, any community in the world, I'm a political ecologist, and any community in the world that seems to be obsessed with any particular specimen or species loses sight of the entirety of the world, loses sight of all the other persons present in the world. The mycological community is obsessed with death. Where did this obsession come from? There are a couple of answers to that. One could be, and this is a choice, these are always choices. One could be that the mycological community represents a flowering of the world, a flowering of this nation in particular, that recognizes and hopes to actualize a reconnection with the world, a reconnection with a recollection of what it is to be present in this iteration of life. Or the mycology and mycological community could be a manifestation of white supremacy. which is a death-obsessed culture. It's a choice. I'm going to bring it back to Paul's stance. Paul has patents. He has a lot of money, right? Paul has a lot of money. He made a choice. He made a choice. After developing a relationship with the environment and acquiring knowledge, he then made a choice to secure and pursue a patent. To pursue and secure a patent. That is not bad. That isn't necessarily good. It's not bad. It represents a choice. Traditionally, we, especially within a Western context, folks assert ownership in order to protect things because ownership is what people recognize within these cultures. Ownership. I own my family. I own my wife. That doesn't make me patriarchal, except in the system. It might have in fact been, how do I protect my wife? How do I protect my family? How do I protect what is life-giving? There's a conversation amongst wealth-based land redistribution personnel, which I am a part of, which asks why it is that indigenous communities seek and utilize this was our land before. There's a reason for that, because that's what folks who are not interested in land redistribution care about. That's what makes them recognize that there's something else going on. No, I own this. You don't own this. You've never owned this. I got here first. This is mine, right? You're familiar, hopefully. If you're not, there are plenty of folks here who can talk about it. Paul made a choice. That choice could serve to actualize a reconnection, or it could serve to sustain white supremacy. Does anyone understand? Not does anyone. I don't want to feel that I'm losing anyone. So I'd like to know if anyone doesn't understand that connection, I will build upon it so that there's greater understanding.
That'd be great.
Yes? Okay. So, when did Columbus sail the ocean blue? 1492. 1492 is not only the time of the beginning of the great American Indian extinction. They're here, right? They're still here. But that is definitely the time, an age of extinction. That's when we recognize things are beginning. It's also when we recognize that climate begins to be impacted significantly by humans. That's the moment. That is the time. Columbus was a very talented entrepreneur. Very talented. Who recognized that a relationship to land, new lands in particular, could produce new wealth. Columbus, granted, was not in a position to claim or file for a patent. There were others who he knew, once he secured the land, they were the ones who owned it. But it is about these owners. It is about the choices that they made. That's what I'm saying. The sustaining, or the tradition that we recognize Columbus has passed down to so many Americans is the entrepreneur tradition. There's nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur, folks. Nothing wrong with being an entrepreneur. Go get your money. Just do well with your money. Do not use your wealth in a way that disconnects people from the world. That's it. And that is the way in which a choice, an entrepreneurial choice, that is a smart decision, capitalistically, entrepreneurially, can in fact sustain white supremacy. It's a choice. What you do with your assets, what you do with your relationship to the environment, either sustains the health of that environment or it contributes to the destruction, degradation, and the loss of that environment. No one's doing anything wrong. People just have choices. I encourage the mycological community to go out there and try to help folks make better choices.
I have a question, but I can wait until the end.
No, the next thing that we're getting to is the bit around personhood as a practice for land-based wealth redistribution.
It might be more of a discussion, but towards the beginning of your talk, you said something about just giving a portion of your land to a group of people. The cultural. Sorry, I'm not remembering. Cultural respect easements. And you said something about to a group of people who would not be exploiting the land. And I was wondering if you could speak to the word exploiting, and specifically in terms of like training. So if you have a group of people, you're saying like, hey, you've never done anything like this before. We're going to train you. That in my head might involve some exploitation because you're messing up. Like you have to mess up to succeed. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I don't think you have to mess up to succeed. I think that's a fault. I think that's falsity. No, but it is. I respect it because it is. I believe absolutely part of the tradition. It is absolutely part of the tradition. But to explain why it is, I feel that way and how it relates to this. When you inherit a tradition, you practice. You grow up in a culture where you learn that tradition and you act upon that tradition in a manner that sustains it and allows you to continue going forward. That's the idea. So there are traditions, historically, that result in not an exploitation of the environment around. So I would suggest that if anyone is going to, if any of you have land or anybody watching has land, I would suggest that if you were to go about identifying a manner in which to establish a cultural respect easement, that you then make sure that the people who are on that space, that they have, that you don't just engage a cultural respect easement for ego benefits, right? That you recognize that the persons who are going to be on that space are going to do well. They have not necessarily a tradition, but they have the skill set, they have the aptitude, they have the knowledge, they understand how not to make mistakes because they're not exploiting the relationship. What it means to not exploit a relationship with the environment, the natural world, the persons present here, is to be reciprocal. You do not make a move on a land. You do not make a move on a species without speaking to that species. You do not make a move in a space without developing an actual relationship. If you engage a space, any territory, any creature, any person, in a manner that has not been commonly referred to as consent these days, it is a violent act. So yeah, I suggest that people learn or reach out to the community and identify persons who are skilled, who are knowledgeable. If you're learning and you're growing, that is good. Don't do things with your process of learning that would result in you making mistakes. That's not good. We're not in a time where you can make mistakes. That time has come and gone. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, it answers.
Part of it.
It gives you a great perspective.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up cultural respect easements because the task, another task that I think is useful for the mycological community is to go out and try to identify persons who can write great respect easements. Here's the thing. Cultural easements, period, those who write easements, there are very few of them. They're all white. They're all white. And oftentimes they're more knowledgeable about land law or land legalities than they are about ecological legalities. Or even like ecological communities and persons who are engaged in that work. I would suggest that if you can find an easement writer, that you bond, or you find someone that they can bond with who can inform them around like, hey, these are things you might want to consider. Because there are people who are writing easements. There are plenty of people who are seeking these things out. Yeah, you have another question. That's cool.
Does someone need to be the owner of a property in order to write an easement? Like, if there's a giant piece of land that's for sale, for example, in my area, like 300 acres of woods that have been for sale for a really long time, and the only person who will ever be able to afford it is a developer, could someone who doesn't own the property try to get a cultural respect easement written?
I think that's a great idea. I think if you whether you have access to the land or the wealth or not, you have a responsibility. That's what it is to be a steward. You know, which I'm under the impression most people here are, right? Like I think that's the idea. Hey, I have a great idea. You have all this land. Why don't you make an easement out of this? You know, it would be great. There could be a lot of repatriating work that goes on there. There could be a lot of revitalization. A lot of revitalization. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. It also brings up a point that I didn't mention earlier, which is that cultural respect easements are, I think, appropriate for people who already currently have land.
Yeah.
If you do not yet, or if you're in the process of acquiring land, I mean, you may already, it's a great thing to begin thinking about and applying to your work at this moment. But primarily, it's a strategy that we emphasize and we present to, or I would emphasize and present to persons who already have land, who are already ready, because it helps us increase some of the flow in that regard. Oh my gosh. I'm finally getting to see your face. Yeah. I would like to get back to the bit about personhood, just because I know that there's a fantastic walk happening in 30 minutes. No, thank you. I'm happy to engage later, and I think there are other people here too. Earlier, I mentioned the 5 solutions for land-based wealth redistribution. They were land trusts, which many folks were familiar with, probably the most familiar. They were repatriation, which folks were familiar with. I encouraged, if you weren't familiar, you get in touch with someone. It also goes by the name of repatriation. Right. Cultural respect easements, which we sort of just had a minor discussion about. Cultural respect easements are the securing of a portion of property by the owner for a particular purpose, and that purpose only. And important that whoever owns that property inherits that easement, or can, depends on the state. Maybe it depends on the county, but I'm pretty sure it's the state. Pretty sure it's the state. And land trusts, cultural respect easements, rematriation. Oh, yes. Personhood. That's where I am now. The world is full of many persons. They are not all human. That's the basis of personhood. Personhood is something that has been recognized. It is a legal tool by which you go about making sure that a state, a governing body, generally with a military behind them, recognizes the rights of an entity. Personhood has to come before rights. Rights don't come. You have to be recognized as persons. There's a great deal of work that's being done. Tomorrow at 10:30, I believe, I'll be having a conversation largely around non-human personhood and mushrooms in particular. There's a lot of work around it. But as a solution for land-based wealth redistribution, I think it complicates the conversation, because now you have to ask yourself, whose land is it? Who gets to redistribute? What communities, at this point, instead of stepping to a space where we say, this territory belongs to this human group, perhaps you recognize that this territory has always been, or has been for a very long time, the space for these 16 different species. And they are very, very upset about the fact that now, what was a great many of them, there are very few of them. Perhaps that is why your plow isn't working. Non-human personhood, like I said, is a legal tool. As a practice for land-based wealth redistribution, It is underexplored. It is a really valuable thing. And I say it's a really valuable thing, again, understanding that we are in a context in which personhood is the only thing people recognize. Many will refer to the persons of the rest of the world, or a recognition of persons of the rest of the world, as a form of animist doctrine or a form of animist practice. It is not. That is a Western concept. I know. Everyone's recognizing what is Western and what is not Western. But it's a good point to fix, to attach to everyone. It is not real. Anyway, animism is something that was developed by anthropologists, for anthropologists. There are many people in the world. They are not all human. Some of them are being recognized around the world. We've got rivers being recognized. We've got cetaceans. We've got great apes. We've got here, in this country, there is a tree. I'm sure maybe you've heard of it, maybe you know. There's a tree that is its own owner. No one can cut down this tree because the owner of the property 200 years ago or so said, I like this tree. I love this tree. I do not want this tree to go. How do I make sure that this tree does not go? How do I make sure that no one comes to threaten this tree with a violence? At that time, the law was a bit more creative. Lawyers were a bit more creative, I guess. I don't see why it can't be the case now. I think the issue, the challenge is, it's underexplored. There aren't enough people out there saying, hey, let's have this conversation about personhood. I know a few species that have pretty significant, powerful, knowledgeable communities in support of them. Some people call them mushrooms. Some people call them mycelium. I don't know. I think they could do with some advocacy. I think that the conversation around non-human personhood has been evaded in the U.S. far too long. I think the U.S. could, rejoin the conversation, regain some knowledge of the world. I think the mycology community has a great opportunity, a great role to engage in that. I'll talk about that more tomorrow. 5 ways of land-based wealth redistribution. There's the 5th, and this is the one that most folks gravitate to because it's easier. It is reparations. It is reparations. It is reparations. 5 solutions for land-based wealth redistribution. Yo. Who's familiar with the reparations map here in the Northeast? Okay, cool. So, Soul Fire Farm. Who's familiar with Soul Fire Farm? Oh, yay. Ooh, Soul Fire. Look at y'all. Soul Fire Farm, in collaboration with a number of other persons, led the development of the reparations map. It's a really cool thing. It gives information about projects going on that deal with some of the conversations that I've had that are seeking folks who have land-based wealth redistribution, because let's be honest, all wealth comes from land. Seeking the opportunity for contact or meet with someone who might be willing to pass off or redistribute their assets and their wealth. There is an issue with that map. One, the title, reparations. On that map are persons who are were not only stolen from land and brought here as slaves, and not only persons who had land stolen from them, but also persons who have been victim to the system by which those persons and that land was stolen. This is for all persons of color. You can only be a person of color with a project to be placed on the map. We support this map with recognition that the word reparations within this framework, within the law, and within culture has traditionally been applied only to those stolen from land and those who had land stolen from them. We support this map because it is time for that conversation to change from one of identity to one of skill, lineage, tradition, and relationship. Persons who are doing well in relationship with the land are persons to which wealth should flow. That has always traditionally been the recognition of wealth because it was a recognition of health. These groups are healthy. This land, this ecology, this ecosystem, it is diverse, it is rich, it is flourishing. Reparations maps. There are a few of them out in the nation. There are a few of them around the world, actually. But there are about 2 or 3 that I know that are being used here in the nation. We currently operate and work with and are in conversation around one of them. I have some flyers that I did not bring with me because I was too busy getting food, but I'll have them around. I'll drop them somewhere where folks can get them to engage with that a bit more. That's the 5th land-based wealth redistribution solution. These are solutions, not because they're ideas, not because they're concepts, but because they work. Build a cultural respect easement. By build, I mean find someone who can write the document and file it for you. Get it established. Contribute, donate land, find persons who have a bit too much, more than they need. Convince them, talk to them, lobby, do all the things. Get them to understand, like, hey, it's not yours, bro. It's not mine. It's not even ours. Why? Because apparently ours is the possessive. Not apparently, it is the possessive. Everyone knows this. But there's something beyond this ownership thing here. Let's talk about it. Here's a way in which we can talk about it. Donate to land trusts. Become a member of the land trust. Become a voting member of the land trust. Help them learn what their responsibility is in a time of climate crisis. Help them learn what their responsibility is. Help them learn. Repatriation, rematriation. I think the mycology community is already ahead of the game. I think that's what it is that so many folks are doing, regardless of if you're immediately interested in remediation or not. If you're interested in growing things, typically you're ahead of the curve, particularly when you're talking about mushrooms. Personhood. I know for a fact that many persons, maybe not all persons here, but many persons who find an interest in mycology have encountered another person that is not human. Many times. There are many who will engage that and say that that is not what's going on. They do not agree with a series of agreements that results in global health. So I don't listen to them. Maybe you shouldn't either. Reparations. It's a mixed bag. Look up the map. If you have some wealth that is inherited or comes from a relationship to land, engage a project. Reparations isn't just funds. It's also labor. Especially if you communicate it as such. It can help. A lot of things get done. Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust Project is a new project. Like I said, I'm a co-director. This conversation that I'm having with everyone here, and it is a conversation because what I'm doing here is this event is a conversation. I'm contributing to this. I want people to go forth and chat about this. This particular workshop, what is called a workshop, has been crafted for a very particular community. It was not the mycological community. It is in fact a community with inherited wealth, with a lot of inherited wealth. Enough inherited wealth to remake the world in several iterations better. And those persons are looking for an opportunity, a conversation to join, a way to figure out how to do that. And they're trying to do so in a context that was not designed for global health. So, what I hope to ask of everyone here, besides, I'm probably stepping on some of the generosity of you because you've already listened to me for a bit. But what I'm hoping that you will choose to do is leave this conversation, go forth, have conversation around land-based wealth redistribution. Identify persons who should have this conversation. Identify communities, organizations who should have this conversation. Send them some literature. Link them to this YouTube video. This is going to be a YouTube video, yes? Yeah, that's right. Hopefully everyone can hear. I have a mic, that's why. Get it started. It is a really, really difficult conversation for folks sometimes. It's super difficult. It's also really fun for me, and I think it's going to be fun for you. The mycology community is powerful. Currently, people really do believe that the mushroom can save the world. That's where most people's minds go. When they hear, like, oh, things are bad. What's going on? There's decolonization, and then there's microremediation. They don't have to be so different. I mean, clearly there's a shirt here going on decolonization medicine, right? But yeah, that's the challenge. Not even the challenge. That is the ask. That is the request. That is the desire. That this is a conversation. There are no experts in this. Why? Because land-based wealth redistribution is not a thing. People don't do it. We're trying to do it. We're trying to make sure it happens, that it happens well, that it happens in a context that recognizes that there are those who are growing up right now who have an opportunity to not only reconnect, but sustain a reconnection. And it takes the persons here, persons who are possibly watching when this is live, are there, and other persons who aren't here and not watching. It takes these persons to assume a position where they are holding their communities accountable. Those members who have wealth that comes from a land relationship or exploitation of the land relationship, and those who have a wealth of knowledge and experience, such as you, having been here with me, sharing the space in this community, chatting about these things, engaging these conversations. That's a wealth. And it comes from a different relationship. It comes from a cultural relationship. It comes from our species connecting. There's no exploitation here. The last thing that I'll say is this is a really difficult conversation to have. And there are supports. And currently we're trying to develop them. And if you pull me aside in the duration of this event, or get my email or something when I present that flyer and such, like, I'm interested in every difficult moment anyone is having with this conversation, because we need to develop a database so we understand how to address this, how to move people and move communities and move organizations past the difficulty to the work ahead. There's a lot of trauma. Yeah, there's a lot of trauma. Trauma, we can be informed about trauma. We also have to move past trauma and do the work. In order to do that, we need folks like yourself to say, hey, not just I have an idea, but I had this experience. This is how far I got in this conversation. What do you think about this? What's up there? That's what we need. I need that. But anyone who is doing this work, they need that too. We'll talk about this more. I'll talk about this more again tomorrow at 10:30. And mushrooms and more than personhood. I don't know where that's going to be, but I'll talk about it more in a different way. It's not about land-based wealth redistribution. It's about people, right? Connection with people. And I look forward to chatting with you all and maybe receiving emails and bumping into you later. And I look forward to moments where you think about this conversation or this discussion outside of any interaction with me or this space. I hope that you make a choice then to do something that sustains global health. Thank you for your time. 2:44. Apparently, I had till 3. If there are conversations, questions that someone has, yeah, please.
So when you were talking about giving the land or giving stewardship of the land to cultures that will treat it well,
Not cultures, communities, people.
communities that will treat it well. Who are you thinking?
I'm thinking people who have the skill set, who understand how not to exploit a species. Oftentimes, these persons are employed currently in the United States as national park ecologists. Ecologists, they're generally considered scientists. They're not always in positions of power to determine what happens where or when, right? Sometimes they go into places like landscape architecture. You generally have to sort through it. You have to sort through the people. You have to identify who's sitting here and saying, like, you know what should go here? This. Those persons aren't immediately the persons I would think of. I would ask someone who says, I feel like this place is looking for something. And you ask the question, why is that? Why do you feel that? What's going on here? What do you think? Well, I'm just noticing how the water's not flowing in a way that feeds this. There seems to be a great many of this species here. Why is that? What people who are asking questions that result in an enriching of their relationship, those are the persons. Not persons who are generally out here not asking questions.
So it's this mix of culture and community. That sounds like people and individuals and skills.
It is. That's why I said people and not cultures, because it is. We all currently exist in a really poor situation, right? It's not going to be one culture or any one culture. Things have been fragmented. Yes, please.
I have 2 questions. I wanted to clarify the 5 types of land-based wealth distribution. I'm sorry, I came a little bit late, but I got land banks,
Land trusts.
land trusts.
Land banks are interesting too, but land trusts is what I presented.
Okay, land trusts.
Cultural respect easements. Rematriation or repatriation. Reparations. And personhood. You got reparations, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Maybe after I get a few more questions. Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us. I just had a couple of questions. I'm wondering if there's a network available of cultural respect easement writers, like you're speaking of, and also a potential network available for these experts that can help guide that process of being in good relations with the land.
So, great question, by the way, and thank you for your time, as well as everyone else. There is the handful of folks who can write the easements. I do not know of any particular network. I do know that some of them, and because it's a distinct professional skill, I do know that many of them can be in conversation with one another, and I do know that there are those who are interested in doing this work. Those who are interested in doing the work are few, because cultural respect easements require the development of language that sometimes isn't just ownership oriented. It talks about durations and times in very different ways, but me personally, we've been in conversation with about 3 of them, and like I said, there's a small group. Because we're trying to do that work right now, I can put you in contact. We're developing that very sort of database, and we're trying to identify ways in which we can educate persons of color, persons who are already established and is respected in that way, to be able to do this work as well. Now, the experts, that's the C. There are just so many people who are capable of doing really good, really well. I think, personally, the best way to do that would be to identify those who are currently easement writers, and identify what persons in their community are immediately available and have the time and capacity to be able to say, hey, let's have this conversation, and then we figure that one out. there are many networks of experts, and many of those networks contain persons who I think can contribute to these things. But does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I understand that there's a lot of people that are doing that work that are available, but specifically when in the context of like reparations or in the context of a cultural respect agreement, we would kind of want a specific person that not only has land skills but can also work with all types of folks and maybe comes from those communities.
Right.
So if there's a database that exists that is in alignment with that whole movement.
Right. Yeah. No. So totally. That currently right now, the force in this region around that would be Northeast Farmers Cover. That'd be us. There are a few others who are doing a similar work, but the concentration and the access and the engagement, the angle, that's us right now. Animism was the question. Okay. Yes. Okay. What in particular about animism are you interested in? Okay. Animism is a term that was developed by a collection of anthropologists in conversation, academically, scholarly, around this phenomena of when they encountered persons who made reference to, spoke of relationships with persons that they, in fact, could not see. It's not something like, it's not just like I see ghosts. That's not what it is. It's really, truly, people spoke of how this river is my mother. This river is all of our mothers. Yes, we were talking about the more than human world, truly. We're talking about animism was a concept that was developed particularly by cultural anthropologists, cultural scholars who saw it as a form of religion because there was respect being paid. And at this time, some of these scholars' perspectives and understandings around respect were informed by a monarchical, papal conditioning, a very different relationship with respect, a very different understanding of how one. You don't have to leave. You're good. I mean, if you want to, that's fine.
I just moved to the margins. Thank you.
A very particular understanding of respect. It's been discussed as a type of religion. Historically, it was discussed as a type of primitive religion. It has also been discussed described as something that this was often a reason why folks experience a great deal of violence by the church and by the colonizers and the conquistadors, right? Because it was not something that allowed for the exploitation of the land. No. You can't do that here. Why can't I do this? Bruh. That's my family. You can't do that. Fam. Stat. That's really it. I mean, again, I'll get into it more tomorrow. But like, I am talking about a more than human world. I'm talking about relationships that extend beyond the human. I'm talking about the reality that there are many types of human, and that is not a racial contract. That is not a racial construct. That is not a racial conversation. That is recognition that there are many different types of environments, and what makes you human is the type of relationships that you have. So when we say more than human, oftentimes I think what we're saying is more than the human recognized within a colonial capitalistic context. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes.
Considering how you talked about how we don't have time to be in place in this work and how often in collaborative projects with people who are holding land and people who have to show and doing projects on that land, I wonder if you could speak to, I'm sorry if you mentioned this at the beginning, but if all of these strategies, these 5 strategies are legally defined to be agreement, and if you could just speak to the importance of having that kind of legal formality from the get-go in terms of working with people who might be on the journey of
Totally.
evolving their concepts around there, but have a high likelihood of changing their mind or drifting on things or wanting to back out.
No, that's a really, really great question. Thank you for asking. So in terms of legality, land trusts are super legal. Like, they have a really rich and old history here in the U.S. Cultural respect easements are legal. They're just effectively, contracts between whatever body recognizes a person's ownership of a particular space, and those who then will assume ownership at a later time, if they assume ownership at a later time, if it's valuable or allowed in that way. And again, owners don't have to be individuals; they could be corporations at that point, or the Catholic Church, which is the largest owner of land in the world, or owns the largest amount of land in the world. So. Rematriation is it's more of a practice, right, than it is necessarily something that happens legally. But we know of guerrilla rematriation, and that's not legal. So find some place where you can do good work legally, and I guess if that works for you, then that works. Is that?
Well, I think what I meant, is specifically, do you feel like in some of these cases, specifically in the cases where the people who are owning the land are not destroying it to people, but I guess specifically with the cultural respect type of approach, how important is it that kind of agreement is made formally and legally?
Oh, it's incredibly important.
For asking environmental money?
It's incredibly important. So the cultural respect easements are really important because what they tend to do is they tend to not force, or they tend to be the result of an owner or a community recognizing that land was stolen, that there were people forcibly removed from their relationship, their kin. That's generally the idea. So that cultural respect easement oftentimes is discussed and described in ways that is a way of creating some sort of reparational contract with an indigenous culture. But also sometimes these things are related to those who are not necessarily indigenous to Turtle Island, but persons who, again, like I said, were stolen from land. There's a number of different cultural respect easements like that. But they're super important. They're super important in the conversation. They're super important to be done prior to, because in actively recognizing that, then more persons are present, more stewards, more diverse stewards are present to discuss what you mean by rematriation, or what you mean by good land-based work here. They just have they have rights to be able to engage that conversation, and it has to be recognized. Does that answer? Yeah. Did you have I felt like you had another bit there. Or maybe you didn't. It's fine. Yeah, maybe you did. It's also 2:57, so okay. Yeah, well, it's super. Oh, yeah. Yeah, hey. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I was wondering, I guess it's more concrete, the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, within this construct that we're now living in that is all about destroying land and destroying people. It's been that way for a while. How are you, engaging in these conversations, and how are you specifically, doing this work and, finding this people, and pushing back on basically everything that currently exists? How are you, I guess more specifically, doing this work and engaging in these conversations to be with like-minded people, and also with very non-like-minded people, because that's who has the wealth and that's who has the land.
Yes, and I just want to, one, because we're being recorded, but also because it's important. Not everyone who has the wealth and the land is not like-minded. Many of them are uneducated or unaware of how to be of assistance. Mm-hmm. Just a point of clarity. But yeah, how are we doing this work? So very quickly, because we're nearly out of time. But we've developed an indigenous consultation strategy. So we're interacting with, and that's primarily what a good deal of the work is for the next 12 months, next year. We're engaged in that consultation strategy in order to understand what people's relationships are with the land, so that we can begin to articulate what a land trust might look like. We are holding this idea of a land trust gingerly, if you will, because the world doesn't need another land trust. People of color want access to land, and apparently the only way in which they can acquire that access to land is by collectively owning it. That's why the land trust emerges. So we're holding that gingerly because there might be ways, there are options for us, which is a legal term. We can create options that allow for access to land, that allow for good work to be done on spaces where good work needs to be done. That is something that we're currently actively engaging in. There's a community, which is the Agrarian Trust Commons Committee. It's a Agrarian Trust, maybe familiar, maybe not, but yeah, they're a land trust project and they're pretty great. And they are currently interacting with people all over the country to develop a series of documents, legal forms that make it clear that the persons who are going to have a relationship with the land are persons who are going to do well. This is Agrarian Trust focuses from a farming context, but I have had a conversation with some of the persons, with Executive Director of Agrarian Trust, around the recognition that in a time of climate crisis and the IPCC's recent report on climate and land, that we really have to do well when we talk about that. But that's a concrete thing. We're promoting the reparations map. We are trying to secure persons and secure that flow. Like I said, this is really the conversation. A formal workshop is developed and will be presented in November to that community of inherited wealth. And the big thing, which I think answers your question, is we are taking copious notes for every interaction we have, so that we can identify what happens when a community rallies around an object, like the community is rallying around our work. We get to see who is honest, who is truthful, and who is not. And we are taking notes. That will be on record. That's really a big thing. And like I said, we recognize it's difficult. And we're okay. Let's do it, though. What else are you going to do? Let's do it. I feel like maybe there's another bit, maybe another concrete bit that I could answer there. I think it gets into nitty-gritty things that probably aren't appropriate for this conversation here. We could have that conversation later. But again, it's now that wonderful time, and I'm going to go. And hopefully you will too. Thank you again.
Thank you.